Hello, very beautiful community. Let's talk a little bit about Putin's Baltic folder and what that might actually mean in practice and what might be in his mind about it, because this has come back in the last few weeks as, again, an issue on the agenda, an issue in our information environment. I haven't been with you as much during the last few days because I am making a strategic decision about my own wedding, because it's in July, and a lot of people feel that the health risk of a car trip and the health risk of being there potentially could have very deleterious consequences. So we're looking very seriously at cancelling it. But it's not an immediately clear decision because the very genesis of the idea was a cowboy romantic, capital R romantic idea. It was the day that I seemingly nearly died in hospital, which was 24th of April 2025. The next morning, when I couldn't even speak, my partner proposed to me. And that means that pointing out that it's a cowboy thing to do doesn't immediately settle the question, because the question initially arose as a cowboy enterprise. So we'll probably be making a decision by the end of the day, but I've had to look at a lot of logistical possibilities and do a lot of emotional weighing, and that's why I've been less present. Putin and the Baltics. There is something in the expert community, which is always a community we love, but it's an ecosystem of communities we love because what? Democracy doesn't survive without being tethered to the practice virtue of truthfulness, and expertise, academic and otherwise, is very important there. It's an important institution that keeps democracy safe. There is one thing that I struggle with a tiny bit in a subgroup in the expert community to do with the Putin Baltic threat. And here is what I struggle with. There are a lot of wonderfully articulated analyses, reports, which say things like Russia has very limited capacity to do much. The Baltic states are very well prepared. There are NATO tripwire forces there, two of them belonging to nuclear powers, France and the UK. Putin has shown a deep reluctance to use nuclear weapons on the basis of what we've seen in Ukraine. Long before Article 5 is triggered, any incursion into the Baltics is going to be met with a multinational defense force with excellent defense cooperation. We've got these sorts of missiles. We can call up that number of reservists. We've planned for all the different scenarios. On and on and on and on and on. Conclusion, any challenge to Article 5 on the Baltics is therefore very unlikely. Now, if that's submitted to, and you see this over and over and over and over, and it's reached a point of a kind of unfortunately evasive glibness, which goes like this. Oh, you're worried about that threat. It's the information, you've missed information, because if you get the information right, it's in the report, and then you'll actually see it's fine because of the information. Yeah, just retweeting that to go to the to go to the people who are wondering, because the information says the other thing, not the thing that yeah. So that one is what it explains it a little bit. Yeah. We love doing that as humans. We have a propensity to do this. You said that was the matcha that was in my tea. It was actually different matcha. Yeah, just look at it here. Yeah, you got it. Right? That's what social media does to even to experts. So what would happen? Sorry to be having making weird animal noises and having an outbreak of insanity on the channel Beautiful Community. But what would I say if a lot of these reports that I've read were submitted to me as not reports, but as a thesis that a master's student has read. I would say brilliant, well argued, but the conclusion doesn't follow. We're well prepared. Putin is weak. There is NATO. Therefore, Putin ain't going to do anything in the Baltics. No, the conclusion that follows is that if Putin is a rational agent, he is not going to believe that he could be militarily successful by attacking the Baltics. That's a box, at least, into which we can put something similar to this line, but this line for us can be a placeholder for a conclusion that does follow from these premises. The conclusion that doesn't follow is that it's very unlikely that Putin could use the Baltics as a political weapon to divide NATO and the West. Because in this latter scenario, Putin doesn't need any military success, he just needs military activation and escalation. And then he needs people in Western capitals to say, well, who cares about Estonia? He needs Western citizens to say, well, some British troops got killed in Estonia, but they shouldn't be there anyway, should they? Right? We've got our own issues. The later this happens, the more Nigel Farages are going to be in power in Europe, who are going to say, well, that's not us, not to do with us. So if the aim is not military success, but political consequences that will divide the West, weaken Western democracies, and then also allow Putin to say, I just need this bit of the Donbass. I mean, it's this thing in Eastern Ukraine. I know you don't care about that, but I mean, it's Eastern Ukraine. I need a bit of it. It's just a small bit. And if you don't give it, I'll be very mean. And, you can give it by just supporting Ukraine less. Right? So obviously this is very cartoonish, but basically the political weaponization of an attack on the Baltics is not at all ruled out by any of these reports. And so we've got a problem, and the problem is therefore we just don't know. And when you don't know, the best thing is to say that you either won't use any probabilities about the event at all, or that you go 50-50, just as a psychological clue. So now let's, having made this point, move a little bit further toward what might be inside Putin's head. Is Putin gagging to attack the Baltics? Is he keen to attack the Baltics? Now, we're in the realm of interpretation here, and the answer, in my view, is no. He would be very reluctant to attack the Baltics in any way. But he was also reluctant to do a full-scale invasion on Ukraine. But in his mind, you made us do it, right? It's a last-ditch, paranoid, defensive step in Putin's mind. And to get something clearer, there's something that I've been implying for years, but I've never said it. So I'm going to say it for the first time on the channels. It is objectively true that Putin is conducting a regime security war, right? Which is why when many channels you watch claim from a pro-Ukraine perspective or an anti-Ukraine perspective that Putin is doing a national security war, they're wrong. He's doing a bit of a national security war in this very loose sense that there is a mystical sense of historical mission and escalation and some kind of mysterious realization of Russia's historical destinies behind Putin's actions. In that sense, you could argue he's doing national security, but even that's not really accurate, because if it's national security, you'd expect something that can be explained to you by a bog standard international relations textbook, and this can't. Because a bog standard international relations textbook can't, but some international relations professors can, ask questions like, do these other people share our values? And do they share our values in the sense that our conception of rationality applies to them? Obviously, they're rational actors. All humans are rational actors. But is our conception of rational agency a bit ideological in ways it doesn't include these people? Could their relationship with death be different to ours, for example? That kind of thing. So, of course, you could press that into a national security box. But even if you did, you'd still have the bigger box, the 70-80% of the motivation, which is regime security motivation. So Putin is objectively engaged in regime security war because an independent Ukraine is a challenge for Putin's domestic power, especially at the time when his domestic power is fragile and Ukraine is right on the border and it is an independent, moderately or semi-democratic state. And then, of course, if Western democracy collapses, which it should, because for Putin it doesn't exist, it's just a sort of a bizarre pretense, that'll also make him more secure at home. So that's regime security motivation, but it's not regime security motivation inside Putin's head, and that's what I wanted to say for the first time. He is doing a regime security war largely, but he's not thinking of it as a regime security war, because Putin basically doesn't distinguish national security from regime security. And a good way to illustrate this is the Navalny group, which is now, not what it used to be because Mr. Navalny's been assassinated by Mr. Putin. Now, Mr. Navalny is an external threat as far as Putin is concerned, and an internal threat. And Putin can't do it's a bit of this and a bit of that, because he thinks that all political opposition to him within Russia must be a foreign plot. It might be very tenuously a foreign plot, like Hillary Clinton putting some bad ideas in the minds of Russians, but that's still a foreign plot. So Putin doesn't think it is theoretically possible to have a domestic opposition. If you don't like me and you're inside Russia, you are essentially a tentacle which I can trace back in a way that leads to various malign outside external forces seeking to undermine me. So Putin just doesn't make the distinction. That's important. It's important because that means we're dealing with a man who will not see different kinds of foreign escalation as optional, even though they might look to some outsiders as being optional. He's fighting for his regime's security when he's fighting in Ukraine. He would be fighting for his regime's security if he did a provocation in the Baltics. So it is a regime security war. It's not a regime security war for Putin, because Putin cannot stably make the national security versus regime security distinction. Putin is slow to act, and Putin is still conservative. And Putin still deliberates. He is not nuts in the nuts sense of nuts. He's nuts in the sense of being, having already started in a bad place, corrupted by partly checked and partly unchecked power, fluid and mostly unchecked power, in fact, corrupted by it to such an extent into various kinds of paranoia and grandiosity and illusion and delusion. Illusion means you get you get wrong what can realistically happen or be done. Delusion, you get wrong what the reality of the current situation is. So you get wrong where the world can go, and you get wrong where the world is at. But he is so cognitively and psychologically corrupted that he is really like an alien to us. Right? You're dealing with an alien to a very large degree, who is going to find certain types of thoughts simply unreachable, even though they're perfectly reasonable, and is going to find certain thoughts which seem nutty to us, not just compelling, but obviously compelling. That doesn't mean he's going to run around and scream and shout, or he's going to make difficult decisions in 7 seconds. He's not. And so you've got to balance that in your head when you think about it. He is in many ways a very, very rational actor who thinks ahead. And he's conservative and risk averse, actually. But he's also pseudo-mystically obsessed with the idea that he's fighting a defensive war. He's also pseudo-mystically obsessed with the idea that he's somehow changing the world. When you make contact with reality without the world offering you much friction on such a high power for such a long time, without people around you to challenge you, you begin to be very, very alienated indeed from a capacity to have a realistic causal picture of the world around you. Right? So he is rational, he is reflective, he's certainly more thoughtful than, most of us in this room. Not every single one of us, but most of us. But he's also wildly nuts in the way that we're not in this room. So you have to we have to balance all of this when we think about the Baltic threat. In some form, that folder exists. It might be a folder in quote marks. It's up to experts in this sort of thing to give a better answer than I can, but it exists in some form. In other words, there is some conceptualization of scenarios about what might happen in the Baltics, what they might do in the Baltics. Putin would have certainly touched on that in his head many times. It becomes more likely when Putin's, in our minds, but not in his regime, security concerns go up. It becomes less likely when Putin's regime security concerns go down. Anders Bak-Nielsen did a very good matrix on this, into which you can sort of put in your own slant on his channel a couple of days ago, where he talked about Putin sort of conceding, Putin trying to freeze the war, secondly, Putin doing a mobilization, thirdly, and Putin doing a provocation on some third front. So a very conservative guy, very reflective guy, not a guy who takes erratic decisions on the spur of the moment, a guy who is more likely to just sit and wait and see how the situation develops very often than to actually try to transform it. A guy who is absolutely convinced he is engaged in defensive action when he isn't. A guy who will be ready to escalate if things are existential for his regime. So these are some of the things you've got to put into the equation when we sort of swirl around the I don't know of the Baltic scenario. Now, I just wanted to add one last thing, and I've forgotten what it is. I'm going to give myself 20 seconds to see if I can recover it. So we've said that Putin is conservative, that he's slow to act. We've also said that he has some big picture crazy beliefs while being still rational, and big picture crazy images in his head while still being rational in the sense of being somebody who thinks a lot about what he's doing. What I think is, I've got this now, what I think is the last thing I want to say is that it is almost unimaginably shocking to discover how powerful reversion to one's basic commitments is for people who are grandiosely out of touch in unchecked power. Putin is now stuck in some ways in Ukraine because he's seeing that certain models of a war of attrition are not going to necessarily work out in his favor, which is why he is going to be putting more of a premium on this kind of a psycho war against Ukrainian civilians. We've made a video about this on the main channel recently, so I'll put that at the end. But he's going to revert, when in doubt, to his main beliefs and see that the latest developments, which might not be favorable to Russia in some important respects. You shouldn't overestimate that. The current optimism about Ukraine is mostly false. It's not entirely false. It's mostly false, and it's to do with largely algorithms. There are some clear and objective positive developments for Ukraine, including the extension of the war on Russian soil. But you have to be very calm and balanced in judging the relative stability of the two sides. Because I can tell you that Putin is heading for defeat, but Putin's defeat is not necessarily going to mean victory for Ukraine. You could have both sides defeated. And in a state of political collapse. So what Putin will do when he's in doubt and things are not going his way, but he can't quite weigh everything up properly, he will revert to his basic beliefs. And the basic beliefs are that the West is in decline, and Western democracies are eventually going to fall apart. Democracy is not a thing. It's just a bogus narrative that Western countries have developed for themselves. It'll go away. Another basic narrative is that NATO just doesn't have any proprietorial grip on Eastern Europe. It's there, but it's ludicrous that it's there, and so eventually it'll get washed away. So it's because of these core commitments and reversion to core commitments right now, in my assessment, that Putin will still be very positive in the long term in his psychology. He's still going to think overwhelmingly that he's winning this thing. He's still going to be sitting on his bed at night and glibly thinking, yeah, look at these guys. They don't understand what they've got coming for them. And actually, the more things go badly for him, unless there's a direct challenge to his power, a crack of the regime, some political mobilization in Russia, he is going to keep reverting to these core beliefs of his that are half true and are partly exaggerations about these, for instance, the inevitable decline of the West as a bunch of democracies. And so that's what he's largely thinking. He's basically thinking, okay, this is more turbulent than I wanted. Okay, well, stuff seems to be on fire in many places in Russia, but they don't realize that once we clear the choppy water progressively, their windows to get a positive outcome narrow, because there are certain historical forces at work, and certain fake ways of being politically are just going to be absorbed by history. I'm going to be very annoyed if along the way these Westerners keep supporting Ukraine more than I'd like them to, but eventually this stuff settles down, right? And I want to live forever. Back against the wall, I probably know I can't, but I could get to 97. I reckon I could get to 97. Reasonable genetics in my family. I'm obsessed with immortality. So why not? I mean, I could pull out another quarter century. That'll probably be enough for historical forces to wash away things that I'm fighting against that I can't defeat as things stand. So that's the broad picture, and that's the kind of wash in which I recommend construing the I don't know, which we have to postulate when it comes to the question of a low threshold challenge to Article 5 in the Baltics. Lots of love, beautiful community.